Signed at the bottom of the page, in a careful hand that pressed too hard on the pencil and made the letters dark as a brand, was a name that did not belong there. Everett Crane read it twice, then a third time, his jaw tightening like a cinch strap drawn too far. Macy. His daughter had signed her own name to the contract, twice, once in print and once in a looping cursive she must have practiced on the back of the stove receipt, and she had done so in the space reserved for the Sunday clause, which the contract did not have, because Everett had left Sundays out entirely. He set the paper on the table and looked at his daughter. She was 5 years old, small-boned and serious-eyed, sitting on the kitchen chair with her ankles crossed in a way that was purely her mother's. Her expression held no guilt, only waiting. "You can't sign a contract," Everett said. "I signed it twice," Macy said. "So it counts more." He did not have an answer for that, and so he poured himself the last of the morning coffee and stood at the window and watched the October wind move through the cottonwood grove at the edge of the property, leaves letting go the way they do when the season is finished arguing with them. The contract in question was a simple thing. He had drawn it up himself, 6 lines on clean paper, the handwriting of a man accustomed to ledgers. Ruth Hadley, formerly of Springfield, Missouri, would come to the Crane homestead outside Emerson, Wyoming, as housekeeper and cook. She would be provided with room, board, and a fair wage drawn from the fall cattle income. The arrangement would last through winter, reviewed at the first thaw. Sundays, Everett had written nothing for, meaning they were his own. He did not want company on Sundays. He had gotten used to the particular silence of that day, the way it pressed against the walls of the house without asking anything of him. But Macy had added a Sunday clause. In her large, dark-lettered print, she had written, "Sundays she stays and reads to me," and then she had signed it, twice. Everett folded the paper in half and went to saddle his horse. He had a woman to meet at the train. Ruth Hadley stood on the platform at Emerson Station with one trunk, one canvas bag, and an expression that Everett could only describe as prepared. She was not a tall woman, but she stood as if she had decided on the subject of standing, and settled at once. Her coat was good wool, dark green, a little worn at the elbows. Her hair was the color of creek water in autumn, pulled back in a way that was practical rather than vain. She saw him coming across the platform, and she did not wait for him to reach her before she spoke. "You're Everett Crane." "I am." "I expected older," she said. "I expected punctual," he said. Though the train had been on time, he did not know why he said it. She did not blink. "I am punctual. The train was not." She looked at the horse and the wagon behind him. "Where is the child?" "Home. She stays with the Dempsey girl when I ride to town." Ruth nodded once, as if filing the information in a cabinet. "I have a few questions before we proceed. The contract covers most of it." "The contract," she said carefully, "has some unusual additions." Everett looked at her steadily. "My daughter has strong opinions." "So I gathered." Ruth reached into her canvas bag and produced the copy of the contract he had sent ahead by post. She had folded it neatly, and the paper was creased in a way that said she had read it more than once. She signed it twice. "I'm aware. Does the clause stand?" The wind pushed across the platform and took a piece of straw with it. Everett thought about saying no. He thought about explaining that a 5-year-old's penciled addition to a legal document was not binding by any definition recognized in the state of Wyoming. Instead, he picked up her trunk. "It stands," he said, and carried her luggage to the wagon. Ruth climbed up without help, tucked the canvas bag between her feet, and looked out at the flat gray sky over the plains. She had a way of going still that was not nervousness. It was the stillness of a person who had learned to take stock before spending energy. Everett noticed it the way you notice a good horse standing quiet at the post, solid in itself. "The house," she said as they rolled out of town. "How many rooms?" 4. Kitchen, sitting room, 2 bedrooms. Yours has a door that latches." He had fixed the latch that morning, a task he had been meaning to do for 2 years. "Who cooked before?" "I did. Macy ate what I made." "What did you make?" He considered the question. "Beans, cornbread when I had time, dried beef, eggs." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "The child is thin? She's small-boned. That is not the same thing." He did not answer. The wagon wheels turned over the hardpan road, and the cottonwoods along the creek threw their last leaves down in handfuls, and Everett Crane felt the distinct sensation of a door being opened in a house he had thought sealed for winter. They arrived at the homestead as the sun went low and flat behind the ridgeline. Macy was on the porch before the wagon stopped, having apparently dismissed the Dempsey girl some time ago by methods Everett could only guess at. She stood in her worn boots and her blue dress with the patched hem, and she looked at Ruth with the frank and total appraisal that only young children will give a stranger. Ruth climbed down from the wagon, and instead of speaking first, she waited. She let Macy look. Macy said, "You have brown eyes." "I do. My mama had brown eyes." A pause that carried more weight than most adult sentences. "You're not my mama." "No," Ruth said, without flinching and without softening it. "I am not. My name is Ruth, and I'm going to cook your supper and read you a story on Sundays, if that suits you." Macy considered this with the gravity of a circuit judge. "It suits me," she said finally. "I wrote it in the contract." "Twice," Ruth said. Macy almost smiled. "Twice counts more." "So I've been told." Ruth looked up at the house. "Now, I'd like to see the kitchen." The kitchen was functional and charmless. A wood stove that drew unevenly on the left side, a pine table with one leg shimmed by a folded piece of leather, shelves holding beans, flour, salt pork, a tin of baking powder, and a jar of sorghum gone half crystallized. Ruth stood in the center of it and took it in the way she took in everything, systematically, without judgment, though her eyes paused on the shimmed table leg longer than anywhere else. "I'll need a list of what you have and what you're willing to buy," she said. "Write it down and I'll see what the budget allows." She opened the canvas bag and produced a small notebook. She had already come with a notebook. Everett left her to it. That first week moved like the creek in October, steady, cold at the edges, not yet frozen. Ruth cooked. Simple things at first, the kind of cooking that is really a form of taking inventory. A proper pot of beans with onion and salt pork. Cornbread that rose evenly because she knew about the stove's uneven draft and compensated for it by the second morning. Macy ate. She ate with the focused attention of a child who has discovered that food can be interesting rather than just fuel, and the color in her face began to change by Thursday, in a way that Everett noticed and did not comment on. Ruth was not warm, exactly. She was not cold either. She was present in the way that useful things are present, without asking to be noticed, but noticeable all the same. She kept to herself in the evenings, reading in her room by the lamp she had asked him to fill. She did not try to make conversation when he came in from the barn, and he was grateful for it. He had grown accustomed to the particular relief of a house where no one expected him to perform the ritual of being all right. On the 4th evening, Macy brought Ruth her drawing book without being asked, and showed her a picture of a horse she had drawn in blue pencil. Ruth looked at it with genuine attention. "That's a good horse," Ruth said. "His name is General," Macy said. "He doesn't bite. Good horses generally don't. Papa's horse does sometimes, but only on the left." Ruth looked at Everett across the table. Something moved in her expression, not quite amusement, but the restraint of it. "I'll remember to approach from the right," she said. The shimmed table was replaced by the second week. Everett came in from the barn one evening to find Ruth crouched under it with a proper wedge of pine she had shaped herself with his hand plane, testing the fit until the table sat level without rocking. She did not announce the repair, She simply slid the new wedge in, stood up, and went back to peeling potatoes. He stood in the kitchen doorway longer than was necessary. The October cold turned serious in November. The first real storm came on a Thursday, the kind that arrives without full warning and drops a foot of snow before morning. Everett was up before light to see to the livestock, and when he came back to the house, red-faced and carrying the cold in his coat like a passenger, there was hot coffee waiting, and a plate of eggs kept warm on the back of the stove. Macy was still asleep. The kitchen held the smell of wood smoke and something faintly sweet that turned out to be the last of the sorghum stirred into oatmeal, set aside for when the child woke. Ruth was at the table with her notebook, writing something he did not ask about. She poured his coffee without being asked. He sat down across from her and wrapped both hands around the cup and felt, for the first time in longer than he could name, that the morning was something other than a task to be survived. "The south fence line," he said. "Will it hold?" The post on the creek end was already soft. "If the ground heaves more, it'll lean. Can it wait until the storm passes?" "Has to." He drank the coffee. Outside, the snow came down with the particular steadiness of a storm that knows it has nowhere to be. "You weren't raised on the frontier." It was not quite a question. Ruth looked up from the notebook. "Springfield," she said. "My father kept a hardware store. We had a wood stove and a proper chimney, and neighbors who were close enough to hear." "Why Wyoming?" She was quiet for a moment, the pencil resting against the page. "The advertisement was honest," she said. "Some aren't. Yours said it plainly. Winter work, fair pay, private room. It didn't dress itself up." She looked at him. "I've found that people who write honest advertisements generally mean what they say." Everett looked at his coffee cup. "The contract left Sundays out entirely," he said. "I want you to know that wasn't negligence. I left them out on purpose." "I know," she said. "Your daughter wrote them back in." "She shouldn't have." Ruth set the pencil down. "Mr. Crane," she said carefully, "your daughter is 5 years old, and she knows what she needs. I don't think she was wrong about Sundays." He had no answer. The storm pressed at the windows, and Macy turned over in her sleep in the next room, and the house held them both in a silence that was no longer empty. The external threat came quietly, the way most real threats do. A man named Grover Pell rode out from Emerson in the second week of November with a land company's letterhead folded in his coat pocket and a manner that was all courtesy on the surface and something colder underneath. The Meridian Land and Cattle Consortium, he explained, had purchased the 3 properties bordering Everett's creekside fence and was interested in a right-of-way for a new water easement. He made it sound like a formality. He made it sound like a gift. Everett stood on the porch and listened. Ruth was inside with Macy, but the kitchen window was cracked because she aired it while she cooked, and he was fairly certain she could hear everything. "The access would run through your south pasture," Pell said, his breath making small clouds in the November air. "We'd compensate you, reasonable sum." "How reasonable?" Pell named a figure. It was low enough to be an insult dressed as a courtesy. "And if I decline?" Pell smiled in the way of men who have been told they are charming too often. "We'd hate for this to become complicated. Water rights in Wyoming are, well, you know how they are." "I know exactly how they are," Everett said. "That's why I filed mine in 1887 with the Territorial Office." He held Pell's gaze. "I suggest you read the filing before you come back." Pell's smile stayed on his face, but went out somewhere behind his eyes. He rode off down the track without another word, and Everett stood on the porch and watched him go until the sound of the horse was lost in the wind. He went back inside. Ruth was at the stove. Macy was at the table with her drawing book. Neither of them looked up immediately, which told him they had both heard. "Is the filing current?" Ruth asked, without turning from the stove. "I renewed it 2 years ago. It's solid." Then he'll look for another angle. Everett studied the back of her head. You know something about land disputes. Ruth turned then, holding the stirring spoon. My father lost half his store inventory to a creditor who changed the terms after the handshake. I learned early that a man who calls something a formality usually means it's anything but. She turned back to the stove. You should write to the territorial office this week, just to have the correspondence dated. He wrote the letter that evening, and Ruth helped him phrase it, sitting across the table while Macy slept, passing the paper back and forth with small suggestions that were careful and precise. At the top of the second page he had written his own name. He noticed that her suggestions had not changed a single word of the substance, only clarified it, the way you clear a clouded window rather than replace the glass. Pell came back on a Saturday in December, this time with a second man, broad-shouldered and silent, who stayed on his horse at the gate while Pell came to the door. Ruth answered it. Everett was in the barn and heard the knock through some trick of the cold air, and came to the porch in time to see Ruth standing in the doorway with Macy behind her, one small hand gripping the back of Ruth's skirt. Ruth had the land filing in her hand. Everett did not know when she had found it. He had it in the desk drawer with the other papers. She had located it and brought it to the door before he arrived. Mr. Crane is occupied, she said to Pell, in a voice that was perfectly courteous and completely immovable. I can tell him you called, or you can read this, which will save you the ride back. She held the filing out. Pell looked at the document, and then at Ruth, and then past her at Everett coming up the porch steps. Something shifted in his calculation. I'll take a copy to our attorney, Pell said. You're welcome to, Ruth said. We'll be here. We'll be here. Everett heard it. He did not think she had meant it the way it landed, as a declaration rather than a statement, but it landed that way regardless, solid as a post, driven to its full depth in good ground. Pell tipped his hat and rode out, and the silent man followed, and the gate stood open behind them, because they had not troubled to close it. Everett went and closed it. When he came back to the porch, Macy was still holding Ruth's skirt, and Ruth was looking out at the road with the filing tucked under her arm. Thank you, Everett said. I knew where the papers were, she said simply. That's not what I mean. She looked at him then, and something in her expression opened slightly, the way a shutter opens on a bright day, careful, but letting the light through. That Sunday was the first one Ruth spent fully in the house without mentioning anything about the arrangement or the contract or what the clause required. She simply stayed. She made breakfast, and afterward she sat in the chair by the window with Macy in her lap and read from a book of stories that she had brought from Springfield in the canvas bag, the one she had carried like it contained something irreplaceable. Macy tucked her head under Ruth's chin and was quiet for the better part of an hour. Everett sat at the table pretending to read the territorial newspaper and listened to Ruth's voice move through the room, steady and unhurried, and he thought about the chair Ruth was sitting in. It was the chair that had been in the corner since Clara died. He had not moved it. He had not been able to bring himself to do anything with it at all, not put it away, not replace it, not set it near the fire where it would have been more useful. He had left it exactly where it was, and gone around it for 2 years. And Ruth had moved it to the window on her third day without asking, because the window light was better for reading, and he had watched her do it and said nothing. And now she was in it with his daughter, and the chair looked like it had always been by the window. He set the newspaper down. He looked at the corner where the chair had been. He looked at the window where it was now. Ruth glanced up from the book, caught his look, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The second chair, he said. He was not sure why. She understood anyway. The table only has one, she said quietly. I'll build another. She held his gaze. I know you will, she said, and she meant more than furniture. December grew deep. The Meridian Land Consortium sent one more letter, formal and carefully worded, but the tone of it had changed. It was the tone of a party retreating with what dignity it could manage. Everett filed the response with the territorial office, as Ruth had suggested, and put the whole matter in the drawer with the other resolved things. He began building the second chair on the second Saturday of December, working in the barn in the mornings before the cold made the wood too brittle. He used good pine he had been saving, good enough that Ruth noticed the quality when she brought him coffee at mid-morning and stopped to run her hand along the armrest he had roughed out. "That's not scrap wood," she said. "No, you were saving it." "I was." She looked at the roughed chair. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, in the same voice she used for things that mattered. On the Sunday before Christmas, Macy sat between them at the window, Ruth's chair on one side, the new pine chair on the other, while Ruth read and snow came down outside in the slow, certain way that means it plans to stay. Macy fell asleep between the second and third stories, and Ruth closed the book and looked out at the snow and did not move so as not to disturb her. "I want to revise the contract," Everett said. Ruth went still. "In what way?" "Take out the part about reviewed at the first thaw." She looked at him steadily. "And replace it with what?" "A permanence," he said. It was not the word he had planned, but it was the true one. Ruth looked down at Macy's sleeping face and then back at him. "That's not a small revision." "No," he said. "It isn't." He turned the new pine chair so it faced her more squarely. "The original contract was a practical arrangement. What I'm asking now is different. I'm asking because I know you, because I trust you with the thing I can't afford to get wrong." He nodded at Macy. "She's not in the contract anymore, not as a clause." "She's the reason." Ruth sat for a long time in the stillness that was not emptiness. Outside, the snow went on without hurrying. "I'll need the contract amended in writing," she said at last. "Properly done. I'll write it tonight." "And Sundays?" She looked at him directly. "In this version?" "In this version," he said, "Sundays were never left out." Ruth reached across Macy and took his hand, and she held it the way you hold something you have chosen carefully and intend to keep. The fire in the wood stove spoke steadily in the corner. The snow stacked itself along the window ledge like something patient and permanent. The new pine chair sat beside the old one, and the two of them together looked like they had always been there. In the spring, when the creek ran clear and the south fence stood solid and the Meridian Consortium's letterhead had not appeared in the mailbox for 3 months, there was a small ceremony at the church in Emerson, attended by the Dempsey family and old Pastor Hicks, and the woman who ran the dry goods store, and had apparently told everyone in the county about the housekeeper who had stood in Everett Crane's doorway with a land filing and told Grover Pell they would be there. Macy wore a dress Ruth had sewn from fabric ordered from the catalog, blue with white stitching, and she held a sprig of early wildflowers because she had read somewhere that weddings required them. After the ceremony, she presented Pastor Hicks with a folded piece of paper and informed him solemnly that she had written a new contract and signed it twice. Pastor Hicks read it and smiled and said it looked binding to him. Macy said, "Twice counts more." There is a kind of wisdom that arrives not in grand speeches but in small acts. A shimmed table leg made level, a chair moved to the window light, a second chair built from good pine kept for the right occasion. Everett Crane was a man who had shut his Sundays away from the world because grief had taught him that stillness was survival. Ruth Hadley was a woman who had read an honest advertisement and answered it with her whole careful self. Neither of them planned on what they found, but the child knew. Children often do. And sometimes the truest contracts are the ones a 5-year-old writes in pencil, presses hard so the letters are dark as a brand, and signs twice, because twice, she will tell you, counts more. If this story speaks to something in your own heart tonight, leave a word in the comments and tell us, what was the small act that told you someone meant to stay? And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and walk with us on more Old West journeys. We have many more waiting for you. Good night. God bless you, and God bless every brave soul who ever answered an honest advertisement.